Hey guys, it's CS Joseph with csjoseph.life doing another episode for season 23. This is season 23, episode 1, also known as Introduction to Jungian Parenting. And we're talking about parenting within this particular season. And if you guys remember, the original video that I created for to welcome to the YouTube channel talks about what the mission is of the CSJ community, as well as the YouTube channel and everything that we're actually doing together as a community. And one of those things that we really focus on is fatherlessness. Now, fatherlessness is a huge problem, and it's taken me now 2 years to finally actually release content that is actually specific to solving the problem associated with fatherlessness. It's kind of ridiculous, I know. It's taken a long time, but it was really necessary to lay down the foundation to make sure that people within this audience or people who watch us from a distance and whatnot, they're actually willing to come to terms with the science and have the basics down so that they could actually learn and listen to the true message, I guess is the appropriate way of saying it. So just keep that in mind and how necessary it is to understand that as we go through this lecture material. I will be doing how to parent each of the individual types following this introduction, but this introduction is to lay down the foundation for the 17 episodes associated with parenting. Yes, we're going to be talking about how to parent each of the individual 16 types. Also, we're also going to be talking about how to behave when you as one of these types with parents, basically, and whatnot, because there is a very important moral principle that we're going to be that's going to be overshadowing this content for season 23, and that is right out of the Ten Commandments: honor thy mother and father. It doesn't matter how horrible the people they are. There is still some responsibilities that need to be taken as a result. But we're not going to be absolving of their responsibilities either. We're going to make sure that everybody is held responsible and that there will be no sacred cows left standing after I'm done with them. Because you know me, I slay every single sacred cow I see because I want to find out whether or not it's worth being a sacred cow to begin with. Just like how ESTPs like to test all the rules, my job is to make sure that a sacred cow is only sacred if it can survive the edge of my blade. Let's be honest. And usually they can't. So as a result of that, I enjoy taking everyone's sacred cows away from them and exposing the truth for what it is. Well, it's no different with parenting. And parenting, guys, parenting is so much more than just like having sexual relations that leads to a children and boom, you have a child. It's so much more than that. Parenting actually permeates every single component of culture that we know it. And parenting is a little bit more than it has a much higher honor than people understand. And I'm going to explain this using a rudimentary model at first, and then I'm going to expand upon it from there so that you guys can kind of see where I'm coming from. Because if you don't understand where I'm coming from a perspective of Jungian parenting, then we're not really going to be successful in implementing the advice that I'm trying to bring to you as a result. So let's get down to it. I made a blackboard for this with my awesome, really, this is really awesome blue, my blue blackboard thing. Yes, awesome. And let's set it right here. And take it there. And awesome. Cool. So, introduction to Jungian parenting. So, as you can see, I got a little Venn diagram there with a little human being, and that's nature versus nurture. Import, export. You also have a stick figure next to it with nature in their head, and then nurture coming out of their hand out of the side. What does that mean? It's basically trying to show you that nature is something that people carry within, but nurture is something that people carry without, right? It is something that comes out of them. It is an export. It is extroverted. Whereas nature, a person's archetype, their personality, their soul, their mindset, how they think, feel, how they make decisions, Everything according to Jungian analytical psychology and typology as we know it is nature, and it is contained within our heads, within who we are as human beings. This is everything, right? The thing is, though, along with that, is that we also have nurture. But what is nurture? Nurture is it's the sum of our actions, basically. Nurture is what our actions, and nurture impacts. So when we impress our nature upon the world or upon other human beings, we are actually providing nurture to fellow human beings in any situation, of any form of contact we have with literally anybody. That's what nurture is all about. So you have to understand that people communicate with each other. Every action they take is a form of nurture. So imagine like a bunch of stick figures in a picture, right? And they all have their own natures, but when they interact with each other, everything that takes place in the interaction itself is nurture. That is how nurture is. And when we're talking about parenting, parenting is nurture. It's also oftentimes why ISFJs are considered the most nurturing of all the types, because they're also kind of the most common parent of all the types. There are more ISFJ parents than they are any other type, if you've noticed. And people are like, what? Okay, C.S. Joseph, that is like a very outlandish claim. How is it possible you can ever actually claim that? Well, I can, because they're the most common personality type on the planet. So because they're the most common personality type on the planet, people have been having sex for years now. And people have been having babies for years now. So it stands to reason they'd also be the most common parent. It's not that big of a leap of logic, right? Or do I need to do what Mr. Jared Vaughn suggests that I do and walk around gallivanting around in San Francisco or the Bay Area verifying every single veterinarian there as to whether or not they're an INFJ, so that I can post on Instagram and make this outlandish claim that most veterinarians are actually INFJs? Well, I mean, no, but, like, it's obvious. It's self-evident. Like, it's not that hard. I've known a lot of veterinarians in my life. Guess what? Almost all of them are INFJs, and that's across multiple locales. And I've even had the opportunity to speak with other people about their veterinarian experiences, and I always inquire, please describe this person for me. They always end up being some kind of NFJ, and I was like, interesting. At a minimum, at least I can claim that NFJs are the most common veterinarians. So, but go out there, test my claim, debunk it, tell me I'm full of crap. It's fine. We have the personality assessment out in beta right now, and it's going to be turned into a tool that everybody could use everywhere with great quality of life and great features, and it's going to be free, and it's going to be fantastic. And then you also have, worksheets and other things that I provide people for you to go verify people's types themselves and go find out whether or not C.S. Joseph is actually full of shit for once. I don't know. You can live your life the way you want to. That's fine. But the bottom line is that regardless of any of these things, nature is everywhere within every single human being, but the nurture is provided through the environment, fellow human beings, right, and interactions with human beings. It's also provided by our spirituality, etc. It's also known as the way of the human being. But this is the first time where I'm going to be really mixing nurture with nature under the subject or the subject umbrella of parenting here at csjoseph.life. It's absolutely necessary to do so. So why? Well, it's because people are pretty ignorant about how all this works. I mean, of course they are, because of fatherlessness. Fatherlessness is the one thing that is causing more problems in our society, in Western society especially, than any other thing. Because fatherlessness, the direct result of fatherlessness is ignorance, right? And then we end up having so many people outsourcing their thinking to other people. Then you end up having the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4 literally proven right when he says the time is coming when people will abandon sound doctrine and sound teaching, and they will accumulate for themselves teachers and news media and articles and pundits and talking heads to tell them and teach them what their itching ears wants to hear. And then they will abandon all truth and logic, right? And then they will turn towards myths and follow myths, okay? This is the number one problem that plagues our race. There's so much misinformation out there, hashtag fake news. There's so many of these issues out there But what would we rely on to help us interpret all the misinformation and get closer to the truth? Our fathers, our mothers, our parents. The problem is we can't exactly do that because we've actually, just like as much as our race and our culture has outsourced our thinking to other people, to credible sources, to unbiased sources, and it's like, okay, wow, thank you for just outsourcing that. We have also outsourced parenting and teaching of our children to other people. Society right now is so structured in such a way where the nuclear family, as it were, or family in general, is actually losing its sense of structure or its existence. It's completely decaying. Whereas you go to the Middle East, or Africa, maybe even South America, not so much of a problem. The family is there, it's preserved, but the more Americanized, the more westernized they get, the worse it gets. Don't believe me? You need to read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John Perkins, check that out. This is the story of an ISTJ, an economic hitman, and he basically destroyed other nations on behalf of the U.S. government, right? But the point is, guys, you really, really have to understand how important parenting actually is. Because without parenting, we will lose our future. Because the more ignorant we become, we've become so ignorant generation after generation after generation. And this is especially important when you read books like The Fourth Turning, which if you haven't read The Fourth Turning, to understand how generational sin works and generational archetypes, Jungian generational archetypes. There's a specific archetype that's attached to every single generation. Interestingly enough, they're hero, parent, child, and inferior. Guess what the last inferior generation was? It's Generation X, guys, who gave birth to the millennials. The millennials are the new hero. Interesting. And the parent is Gen Z. Try convincing a Gen Zer of anything. Good luck. They're so pessimistic. Have you even met Gen Zers? Those people are so pessimistic. I married one. You think I could convince her of anything? It's really hard. Because it's like, she's like, okay, yeah, that's actually true. But most of the time she's like, no, you're kind of full of shit. And I should probably look into that a little bit more. She's pretty cool like that. The thing is, that's my experience with all Gen Zers. And that's why Gen Zers often tell me, quote, that ain't it, chief. Because that's what they say when they think that you're full of shit. Well, you hear that more from a Gen Zer than anyone else. But if you want to get to the more infantile, inferior generation, well, the generation that has the most depravity per capita, well, the generation that brought us horribly or consumed and bought the past generations, bought what the past generations were selling. The Generation Xers, well, here, have Doritos every single day as a child. Have candy every single day as a child. And all of a sudden I find myself 300 pounds as a 14-year-old. That way of thinking came from Generation X, okay? And they were raised by the baby boomers, the child function, ooh. And then there's the greatest generation, the parent function generation, wow. And then there's the generation before them, the lost generation, the generation who fought World War I. That was the last hero function generation, you see? And it was the parent function generation that fought World War II, right? And then gave birth to the child function. Wait a minute. Woodstock in the 60s kind of seems like childlike. Oh, it's the child function. Hashtag, Freddie Mercury and all that. Disco, bro, child function. You see, all of a sudden it was child function, but now the hero's back, and that's the millennials, right? And yet the millennials are the most derided of all and demonized of all the generations. Seriously, guys, show some respect, because it's not the millennials' fault that they were sold downriver by previous generations. Think about like the huge amount of national debt the United States of America has. Think about how the fact that there used to be subprime mortgage loans in like 2005. That's when it became okay to give people subprime mortgage loans, which led to the crash in 2009. Did you know that at the same time, those same laws, that millennials who were going into college around 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, they were given subprime student loans? Did you know that my subprime student loans, that I didn't know anything about that. I was just a stupid 18-year-old kid. That's for some reason I had to get loans to go to college because I was taught by my Gen Xer parents that college was so amazing, and I had to do the right thing because my parents were double affiliative, ISFJ mother, ENFJ father, etc. And because of that, I had a lot of pressure to the point where my father said, you will go to college or you will be kicked out. So it's like, okay, I don't have any choice. Tell that to SI and Fury, I didn't have any choice. So I lied, cheated, and stolen to get into college. I did. I lied. I lied through my teeth, right? I even cheated. I even cheated in school because it was just so overbearing. Because school favors philosopher types more than any other types. I know some ENTPs are really good at school, but when you have anti-nemesis and you don't actually know what you want to do, and you find yourself in a program called Game and Simulation Program because I just want to gather up teachers to teach me what my itching ears want to hear, you see what I'm saying? I end up becoming a little depraved, right? And then it ends up being my fault, such that I end up having subprime student loans. Oh, yay! And all of a sudden, my interest rates are 10%. Isn't it statistically, if it's above 7%, it's impossible to pay off a loan statistically? Think about that for a second. And this is what has happened to the millennials. No wonder the millennials are so bitter, and no wonder the millennials are raising very pessimistic Gen Zers. Have you guys thought of that for a second? Have you thought of that? So think about these generational archetypes, because these generational archetypes are absolutely key to understand human nature and nurture. And it is the nurture, the collective nurture, that ends up massaging and creating these generational macro archetypes. And this is why we have, and gosh, I can't believe I'm quoting Gundam Wing, but I am. In Gundam Wing Endless Waltz, it is the endless waltz of war. And it goes over and over and over and over. It is cyclical because, folks, remember, I tell you the truth. All that has happened before will happen again. History will always repeat itself. And now that we have people who are the World War II veterans, the last parent function people are dying right now. They're dying out. And with them, the memory of the horrors of World War II, such that the parent function is being born again right now. The new parents, the Gen Zers, and then the new child, which is the generation after the Gen Zers, right? These Gen Zers are having babies now. They're entering into the workforce right now. And guess what? Where's the big war, right? There's another one coming, right? Because if you just follow history and the cycle of history and the 4 archetypes, it always happens, right? This endless waltz of war, for example, and these conflicts needs to stop. The only way that's going to stop is if we, as a race, become enlightened. We get to a point where we're able to become better than we are. Well, we can't become better than we are unless we understand the yin and yang equilibrium relationship between nature versus nurture and the 4 archetypes of generations. And how past generations end up causing, so much pain right now in the present. And then we ourselves inherit that pain and anguish from past generations, such that we end up committing generational sin. Generational sin. Have you guys ever heard of, the apple didn't fall very far from that tree? You ever hear that sentence? That's a huge issue, okay? So if the apple didn't fall far from the tree, what do we do then? What do we do under that situation? Well, it's an example. It's a stereotype of that person or that boy has just inherited the generational sin and repeating the mistakes or the sins of the fathers. You ever hear the concept of the sins of the fathers? That's where that comes from. This is the sins of the fathers, okay? So the sins of the fathers, ends up being passed on generation, and we end up making the same mistakes. Why is it every time we vote for a president of the United States, it's all the same bullshit every time over and over and over again? Well, it's because Americans don't have the right to select our leaders. We have the right to elect. We don't have the right to select. And it's just this giant Xanatos gambit where the people who really rule the United States of America end up, through their control of the political parties, the current popular political parties, here, we're just going to choose whatever candidates will benefit us and then give the American people the chance to, choose those candidates. But then it doesn't matter who they pick, it still benefits us the most. Because that's what a Xanatos gambit is, folks. You provide options to other people to make a decision, and it doesn't matter what decision they make, it still benefits you, your interests, and your agenda, right? This is literally how the American political system works. Oh, wait. It's literally how every political system works on this planet, such that the philosopher types that control the political systems have set it up that way to keep their old boys club and their oligarchical standards, etc., present and within power, because those who have power are afraid to lose it, etc., right? This is where that comes from. This is why the Constitution of the United States of America is so important as a document, because it flew in the face for many, many years, for decades and decades against that, until, of course, I think it's like the 17th Amendment or the 19th Amendment, where people were able to decide their senators through popular vote. And that's when things started going really downhill, because it used to be that the states were able to, with their state assemblies, their state legislatures, it used to be those bodies chose who state senators were to send them to Congress. Now they're just decided by popular vote. Okay, that's lame. Remember, folks, temperament-wise, there's more censors than there are intuitives. You cannot allow things to be chosen solely on popular vote, because the 70% censor majority is biased towards concrete decision-making, which then the minority intuitive decision-makers end up getting screwed. Statistically, for example, 30% of the population are intuitive. That 30% of the population end up making more money and end up being more successful statistically with more wealth than the other 70%. But that 70% has a majority. If everything's decided by popular vote, then those people end up voting out the wealth out from under the intuitives who worked really hard to earn it. And then they redistribute it, right? Because that's a 40% majority of the 70% who are affiliative, right? And the NFs, the 15% of the 30% intuitives are affiliative too, and then they buy into it for some reason. You see? All of these things move in together. Do you guys not understand what I'm trying to tell you right now? I'm trying to show you that the type grid exists from a macro level. It's not just with individuals. The type grid exists with entire temperaments across all of the nations of this planet. It also exists across all of the generational archetypes, okay? The hero function is represented in a generation. The parent function is represented in a generation, right? Child, inferior, same thing. It's within a generation, okay? All these things. And a generation actually ends up acting out the 4 archetypes of an ego, right? Such that, this is why human beings have lifespans. Because psychologically speaking, you literally have the entire ego of the human race represented within each of the individual functions on a macro level, okay? And this is absolutely key, because this represents at a macro level what people's psyches are doing collectively, and it shows you the shape of the collective unconscious of man, as it were, right? All these things are needed to be understood to understand human nature, because we've been talking so much about human nature from like a very micro level on the basis of an individual, and I talk about things about personal sovereignty, etc., and how we need to be propping up the individual, whereas it seems like this plague crisis that we have out there is systematically destroying the individual and propping up the collective over everybody else. And then we end up having people buy it. Although, if you look at it, the parent function, the Gen Zers out there, they don't really buy it that much. They think it's bullshit. They absolutely do. And it's also interesting seeing millennials, because millennials lived through a 9/11 and they think it's bullshit too. I mean, just look at the statistics. Most people believe that 9/11 and the standard narrative that is purported by people that 9/11 2001 actually is bullshit. Because it's like, we know we're being lied to. We don't know how we're being lied. We don't know what the real story is, but we just know it's a lie. We just know it's BS. You know what I'm saying? And the majority of millennials, very large majority of millennials, I believe there was like it was like in the 70 percentile area, like a lot of millennials within this study that I read about a few years back actually showed that they maintain that 9/11 is bullshit. You know, I wonder what the statistics would show, especially with Gen Z, regarding the plague that's out there right now, right? Is not the plague another global 9/11 from their point of view? Yet they're the parent function, yet they're the most pessimistic. But wouldn't they, because they're the most pessimistic, be targeted the most? Wouldn't Gen Zers be targeted the most by governments, by philosophers who are trying to stay in power and hold on to their power? Wait a minute, what are you as parents doing? What are you guys as parents doing about this? Huh? What are you doing about this? What are you doing about your parents? What about you? Are your parents baby boomers? Or you see that meme? You see that meme? Gosh, here's a great example right now. Listen to this, folks. You want to see a perfect example as to why Gen Zers are the parent function of the generational archetypes right now? Do you guys want to know why? Here's proof. You know that meme that's going out there that says, okay, boomer, and it's what they say to, that's what they literally say to baby boomers who are the child function. They're the child function. Baby boomers equal the child function of, the collective unconscious of man. That generation represents the child function, and the parent function of the Gen Zers are like, okay, boomer, whatever you say, boomer, and they make fun of these old people in this way because they're like, wow, these old people are so childish, but we're being responsible. And how is it we're just getting the workforce. We're only like 25, 26 years old. It's the oldest Gen Z, and we're in the workforce. And it's like, really? Why is it up to me to have to be responsible here? You were supposed to be responsible for me, but no, instead you sold me downriver, and they end up having this perspective. You see what I'm saying? So, anyway, folks, this is how nurture is divided amongst the, how it affects the natures of all of the generational archetypes right now. This is absolutely critical and relevant to knowing and understanding parenting, Jungian parenting, okay? Because it gets down into responsibility now, okay? Yes, when it comes to parents, many of you don't know your parents. Many of you have never met your parents. Your parents have probably passed on or died, or maybe your parents abandoned you as a child. Let's be honest, I don't really know very many people that have great relationships with their parents. But also, I would like to posit that society is structured in that way on purpose, because if people don't know their parents, then they end up becoming ignorant. And then in their ignorance, they allow their thinking to be farmed out and outsourced to, media pundits because they're too lazy to figure it out on themselves. If you guys don't believe me, there's a huge argument made about this in Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Talks about when the Lalilulelo, also known as the Patriots, which is an AI system, is basically proving to a character in the game known as Raiden that he's an idiot. That he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. He's completely ignorant. That all of his judgments and all of his experiences are a sum total of this AI system's involvement and influence on his daily life, and he doesn't even know. And the AI system makes an argument that there's so much misinformation out there that everyone, and it gets so overwhelming that people just end up defaulting to allowing their thinking to be outsourced to people, to credible sources, right? In fact, I was actually having an argument with an ESTJ earlier today who basically told me that by right of majority, he has every right to force me to take a vaccine whether or not I like it or not because it protects everybody else. And I literally told him I would rather have dangerous freedom than safety and slavery. And it's like, you have no right to tell me or to dictate to me what goes in my body. He says, absolutely I do, because you would be putting other people at risk. So I have every right to force you against your will. And I'm like, no, actually you don't. but this is the kind of thinking that people are being conditioned into believing these days. But it's so interesting that the parent function, the Gen Zers, are not interested. And it's interesting that the millennials are kind of like, yeah, no, and then the millennials are training their children, which is causing their children to be pessimistic because the millennials barely believe that 9/11 is even true to begin with, statistically speaking, such that then they end up training or teaching their Gen Zers that, like, yeah, it's bullshit and you shouldn't be paying attention to any of this crap, you know. And it's a no wonder that there's this huge war for people's attention. You know, it gets even worse than that because we've outsourced our thinking so much to the internet and credible sources and unbiased sources, because we've already talked about the bias paradox and how there's no such thing as unbiased. There is no such thing as unbiased. The state of being unbiased is itself a bias. Go read the Epic Times, like, you'll understand as soon as you see that. They claim to be the most unbiased source out there, and yet their titles are clickbaity and they're just trying to make money. So there's no such thing as unbiased, guys. It's an illusion or a delusion. Let's be honest. Don't delude yourself. There's no such thing as unbiased. But anyway, back to nature. And we got a long way to go. As you can see, you could probably understand why I broke this lecture up into pieces. We're already 30 minutes in, and I haven't even gotten past the first 25% of what's on my board here. But the point is, folks, nature ends up being this problem because we've outsourced our thinking to others. But because we've also outsourced our thinking, because we're so fatherless, because we're not parenting properly, we're not parenting our children properly, we find ourselves in a situation where we are also outsourcing our parenting to other people. We're outsourcing our parenting to government. We're outsourcing our parenting because we're so focused on getting that almighty dollar. We're so focused on getting that money, mostly because we don't have any choice because we're actually super poor. A lot of people think United States of America is like super mega rich, but when you look at quality of life, we actually have some of the worst quality of life compared to many other places, right? Europe has a lot better quality of life. I actually spent a lot of time in Italy and also Germany, and they have a way better quality of life in general compared to what is in the United States of America. I mean, right down to the quality of their food and their food laws, for example. You know, they don't have as much processed foods as we do here in the United States, as an example, right? So there's all this, all these things are different. All these approaches are, how people are living their lives are very different. But anyway, I'm at risk of droning on and on here. So parenting is a problem because we're now outsourcing our parenting and it's just creating even more ignorance, and we're creating even more problems. I mean, quite frankly, at this rate, the human race deserves to be tagged like cattle at this point, because that's, the philosopher folks who are in power end up actually treating us like cattle because they actually end up believing that they're better than us, and they're willing to sacrifice us and our lives for the sake of their own agendas. How many times has this happened in history when it comes to wars? You can't tell me that doesn't exist. Yet we continue on with our daily lives choosing not to do anything about it, right? Because, not only are we ignorant, we're willfully ignorant. We choose to be ignorant, right? Because we'd rather spend time watching Netflix other than reading a book or having arguments with a stranger about whether or not it's okay to have forced vaccinations, right? Forced vaccinations do a really good job. Just talk to those children in Africa who got the polio vaccine, and then 500,000 of them died because of that vaccine. Yeah, that's appropriate. Yeah, look that up. That's documented. Check that out. And no, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Don't claim that I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm actually a pro-vaxxer, a late vaxxer. But at the same time, I want to know exactly how it was manufactured, where it came from. Is it even regulated? There's no regulations for vaccines. Just look it up, guys. You can't even sue Monsanto, where a lot of the vaccines, can even come from, or subsidiaries of Monsanto, that you can't sue them. It's illegal to sue them. Think about that for a second. There's just so much, and why are they getting special treatment, right? Why is everyone all these people getting special treatment? You have to question it, folks. You have to question it. Because if you don't question things like this, what business do you have being a parent? Okay? What business do you have being a parent? If you are causing your children to become ignorant, what the hell are you doing? What the hell? You can't do that. You can't allow your children to become ignorant. It doesn't matter if your parents raised you to be ignorant. You are the parent now. You still have a choice. You have the choice. You have the choice to make sure that you're not being lazy anymore and verify all of your beliefs, or at least weigh everything out. You have the ability to do that. Should you not do that? Should it not be your responsibility because of your children? And don't worry, I'm a huge hypocrite for saying my children is multiple states away at this point because I left California, and then I'm just labeled by people in their life, by their family, as someone who doesn't care. No, I'm taking responsibility. I have to take responsibility for my health, I have to take responsibility for my business. I shouldn't, 13% of everything I make goes to a government that I absolutely cannot support, in the state of California. Are you kidding me? Gavin Newsom, are you serious? I can't do that. I have a health condition, a pre-existing health condition. I needed to move to a very rural place to reduce my chances of getting this plague so that I'm not, dead. You know what I'm saying? All these risks exist, right? And I have to take responsibility, but then I am derided and demonized for taking responsibility because apparently I'm supposed to be a man, and as a man, I have to be Superman, right? And then as a result, I have to deal with the fact that it's very likely that my own children, when they come of age, they're going to blame me for never being around. When the reality of the situation is I've been working my ass off the entire time. But do they know any different? No, because they're only used to the narrative that's been told to them by by my ex-wife and her family. You see what I'm saying? So, as a result of their need to satisfy their own pride or to protect their own egos, etc., which is just, again, it's ridiculous, right? But this is nurture, right? This is nurture. Sometimes nurture happens and we just don't know what to do. There's only so much room for us as human beings to judge our fellow human beings, when it comes to parenting or children or these things, because the reality situation is just not fair. So I charge you, whoever is watching this, make sure you read the book, The Boy Crisis. Understand that boys have it really bad. Understand that feminism is destroying men, and it's also destroying women as much as it's men. Because women are ending up settling for man-children as husbands instead of actual men. There's very few people out there that are actually training real men. Jordan Peterson, for example, even though he's a two-bit globalist, and I absolutely am anti-Jordan Peterson, his book 12 for Life is an interesting attempt at trying to, galvanize the men's movement. Or there's that book, the red pill book known as The Rational Male, right? These books exist. Or the How to Be a 3% Man, or The Game by Neil Strauss, or The Mystery Method, which is written by a friend of Neil Strauss, etc. All these books exist to support the men's movement because no one else is. And all of a sudden the pickup artists are the one actually running the men's movement. And then all the man-children buy into that. They don't actually become men. Here's another issue. There's no men, and we've outsourced our teaching and outsourced our parenting to government, to public institutions, such that there's no such thing as a rite of passage anymore. You'd think that getting a high school diploma is a rite of passage. It's not, because the rest of society does not respect somebody as a man as a result of completing that. It's only when someone becomes self-sufficient, produce more than they consume, have their own transportation, their own job, their own place. At that point, society recognizes that person as a man, and at that point, it's socially acceptable for that man to have a woman and be physically intimate with her. It's only after then it's socially acceptable in our society. But we're not even teaching that to our children. It gets even worse than that. So many times parents buy into the bullshit idea that we should be asking our children, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? That is actually an abusive thing to say to your children, to ask your children. So stop doing it. Instead, you need to ask your children something a little bit more realistic and just be like, hey, what are you going to do when you grow up to meet your needs when I am no longer meeting your needs? And you tell them, on this date, I am no longer meeting your needs. My expectation is that you will be meeting your needs. I will train you to have the proper skills and everything for you to become 100% self-sufficient so you can produce more than you consume. especially to your sons, so that they have that. You have to do it with your daughters because you can't trust other sons of other men out there, the sons of other men. You can't trust them because they're likely statistically man children anyway. I'd say about 8 out of 10 of them. Actually, the statistic according to Corey Wayne is actually only 3% of men out there are actually real men. This is taken from his book, How to Be a 3% Man. 3%. So you have to protect your daughters from those 97% of man children out there and encourage them to be as self-sufficient as if they were a man, because you can't trust those her to be able to get with just those 3% men. Unless, of course, you make her into this woman who understands the difference between a 3% man versus a 97% man, so that that she's so great that she only attracts 3% men, and then you don't have to worry about it then, right? Good luck, because chances are you as a father was a 97%er yourself, and somehow you ended up, getting into a situation where you ended up having children while being a 97%er and don't really have any experience being a 3%er yourself. You see what I'm saying? I'm just using Corey Wayne's statistic here very arbitrarily, so forgive me. It's very loose. Loose conjecture with loose generalization. But you see my point, right? So, anyway, that's a lot to unpack. Sorry, I just had to get all this out of my chest to begin with here, because if I don't, we're not going to have the right foundation for going into these parenting lectures. This is absolutely critical. So remember, the bottom line is that every human being has a nature. Collectively, there is a nature per generation that represents the cognitive functions. These are all of our natures. But when we utilize our own nature to communicate, interact, any form of interaction, it produces nurture, and that's the export. And we are actually nurturing fellow human beings. And it's not just people who are our children, it's everybody. Like my YouTube channel is nurturing people all the time. People think that the term nurture is about some kind of positive thing, and that I'm very supportive of other people, and I'm nurturing them, and I'm caring for them. Well, yes, of course, because I'm telling them the truth, the harsh, unpleasant truth, right? And I'm saving them from the comforting lies by burning them away with the truth, with T.I. Parent. You see what I'm saying? Well, why can't we do that with our own children? So that brings us back down to the next point. Everything every person does is nurture-based, but what's the next point? The next point is the responsibility of parenting. Huge. This is huge. I regret that it's only taken me 45 minutes to get to this point, because this is the second point in the lecture and not the first one. But it was really important to draw the previous distinctions there before we can get to this point. But the responsibility of parenting. So, just because you have a child, just because, a kid is not your kid, it does not make it your responsibility to not parent them, is basically my point. When I became a man, I was 27 years old when I became a man. I literally walked into a building, a man-child. It was a strip club. It was pretty ridiculous, that whole thing. And I remember being in the strip club and feeling this huge amount of shame. I was a married man. I'm in a strip club with my cousins. They're basically married and in relationships. They're enjoying all these girls all the time. And I just sat there refusing girl after girl after girl after girl after girl after girl after girl. I absolutely hated my marriage. It was just ridiculous. But then seeing all these women and everything that they had to offer, and things that I didn't have at all since starting my marriage when I was 19 years old. And I was 26, just about to turn 27. It was the week or two before my 27th birthday. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrifying. It was an extremely painful experience. And then this ENTJ woman came up to me, and I cracked, and I got a lap dance. It's the first one. It's the only lap dance I ever had in my life. And in that entire experience, it's wow, I'm really missing out. Wow, I'm actually a piece of shit. Wow, not only have I just betrayed my wife and betrayed my marriage in doing that, but I've also realized why I did this. I was disloyal in that moment to my wife because I was so bitter towards her. I was insanely bitter towards her because of everything that she had subjected me in our loveless marriage up to that point. And I told myself, it's like, okay, there's a lot more out there, you know? Like, having that experience in the strip club taught me that there is way more out there in life that I am missing out on. But the reason why is because I lack self-respect. Because I believe that I should only take responsibility for things that are my fault. When the reality of the situation is, a real man is someone who takes responsibility for things that are not his fault. Because it is written, and it is written in the book of James, and I quote, "Any man who knows what good he ought to do, but does not do it, he sins." How does that link into parenting? The point is, I came to this epiphany, I came to this realization in this strip club, and I immediately vowed to completely change and have self-respect and be completely different. And I was not going to allow anyone, especially my wife, disrespect me in the way that I was experiencing up to that point. So I went home, I told her about the whole thing, came clean about the whole thing, and I literally told her to her face, you have a choice. You will either divorce me right now, or you will agree to allow me to see other people, and we will end this relationship, or you can change. Well, interestingly enough, she opted not to change, right? But I had self-respect at that point in time. And I was like, nope, not going to allow this woman to treat me this way at all. And I've not allowed any woman to treat me that way ever since. I became a man. I had self-respect. I was no longer a nice guy. Because it's like, I have needs. I have to take responsibility for meeting my own needs. I need to have personal standards for my relationships, for my marriage, for my relationship with any woman, for that matter. I need to have personal boundaries to make sure that any woman or any man or any person in my life does not inhibit me from meeting my own needs, right? Which there goes in civil liberties and personal responsibility, etc. And then after I have those three things done, I can have personal goals and seek out my own personal goals. And as a result of having those four pillars of self-intimacy, I have the roof of self-respect over me. And that's when I became a man. Why is it we don't teach this to our children? We don't teach it because we're ignorant of these things. Okay, this is why I said you guys need to watch Season 6, because Season 6 playlist on the YouTube channel explains all of this, right? But it goes even deeper than that. The thing is that because people don't know their fathers, because people don't know their parents, because their parents are either dead, or they're deadbeats, or they're gone, or they've abandoned you, or whatever negative thing you have with your parents, it's that as a result, the entire collective human race in some way, shape, or form is responsible for bringing up young people. Actually, parenting is a shared responsibility. It's not just something that people do because, they're your parent. Yes, they have primary responsibility, but the rest of everybody else, if I see boys, I have a secondary responsibility as a good neighbor to hold those boys accountable for their misdeeds, instead of just fully expecting, their father to be around. Their father may not even be around at all, right? And then it falls on me to call them out in front of people, maybe even publicly shame these misbehaving boys in front of others to get them to realize that they've gone too far. You see? It becomes a secondary responsibility, not a primary responsibility. While it is the primary responsibility of the parents, it is the secondary responsibility of everybody else to make sure that we are parenting and raising up young people in this way. But guess what? People are still children all the way to the day they die. This is why I have no problem getting into an elderly person's face and criticizing them for their ignorance and telling them where they're incorrect. I'll do this in a very loving and respectful way, but I'm not going to let them tell me, like this gentleman did earlier today. He's in his 70s, telling me that, I have no right to my own body, and for the sake of his safety, he has every right to tell me what to do with my body and force vaccinations on me, whether I like it or not, whether or not I give my consent or not. Okay? That's ridiculous. So of course I'm going to tell somebody like that that's never going to happen. So, responsibility. The responsibility of parenting. So when you are going into this lecture series, this is not about how to be, it's not just about how to be a good parent, how to parent your children, your own children, which it is that for sure, but it is also to show you how you could parent other people's children, or anyone for that matter. Because what this series is supposed to do, what this season is supposed to do, is to empower your parent function so that you, and your critic function, so you could use these two functions to actually teach and parent other people to prevent this disease known as ignorance. I tell you that this community is all about stopping fatherlessness. And guess what? We've been doing that. We've been taking families who are broken and bringing them together and creating new families. We've been saving marriages and preventing divorce. We've been helping people understand each other at levels they've never been able to, understanding themselves such that we're even preventing suicides. As a result of those suicides prevented, new children have been born since then. Okay? We have a responsibility as a community to make sure that we are parenting other people and not just our children. I see my wife parent people all the time. Sometimes she'll go on Facebook and whatnot, and she'll TI parent people because they need to be parented, because she's like, wow, fiery sword of truth. I'm pulling it out right now, and I'm going to battle with all these ignorant people, because it's like these ignorant people keep on telling me #trust the plan. And it's like, wow. Thank you for outsourcing your thinking and outsourcing your hope to other people instead of being able to have some semblance of self-reliance. You know, that thing we should be teaching our children to begin with anyway. It's just ridiculous, guys. Critical thinking. So you have to understand, this is a concept that comes from Halo 4. The Didact, which is the villain of Halo 4. He talks about the mantle of responsibility, and the Forerunner alien race who came before mankind within the context of the story talks about the mantle of responsibility. And the mantle of responsibility is this thing where there's a race who literally runs the entire galaxy and looks out for the other races, looks out for the other children, as it were, to make sure that the galaxy is run in an orderly fashion and there's no chaos, no needless death, no hunger, none of these things, right? This is a mantle of responsibility that we have, regardless of our generational archetype, to take full responsibility for the parenting. Not just parenting at the micro level within our families, but parenting at the macro level for all children, for all people. We need to be teaching critical thinking, which doesn't happen anymore. It's gotten so bad, actually, that, government has completely changed how math goes when they're teaching mathematics now, that parents can't even teach their children mathematics now because what was taught to their parents is no longer being taught to the children. As a result, there's this huge disconnect between parents and children, such that parents get so frustrated and so stressed out with teaching their children when they're doing homework at home after they've been to school that they just give up and further outsource their teaching and their parenting to institutions. I maintain this is by design. You can debate me on that, but guess what? It definitely benefits people who are in power the more ignorant people are. There's an old saying from a very powerful political figure in history who was a freedom fighter, and he said, government does not want you to become wise. Think about that. Wisdom is the key. Wisdom is the key when it comes to parenting people. But how do you parent people? How? Well, it's all about the cognitive functions, folks. If you really want to teach somebody something, you got to target their critic function, and you got to smack it. You got to stab it. You have to burn it. You have to crush it. You have to stomp it. Okay? To do that, to go after my critic function to teach me, you send me a bunch of statistics to show me that I don't actually know what I'm talking about. Really, really good research. Very, very good research. Looking at pros and cons, and it compared and contrasted, and then weighed out for a final judgment that you provide me and tell me why you believe this based on all this research. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I was having some preferred input ignorance there, right? Because remember, the ignorance of TI is preferred input and last known input, where I make decisions based on last known input, which could be old information, or I make decisions based on preferred input, what my itching ears want to hear, as prophesied by the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4. So, understand we have this mantle of responsibility when it comes to parenting children. It is absolutely critical, very critical, that we take on this mantle of responsibility. There are many people out there who are like, well, that's not my children, that's not my responsibility. Sure, but then we also have the responsibility to love our neighbors as ourselves, which means if we love ourselves and know how to take care of ourselves, it's our responsibility to love and care for others only after we have loved ourselves, such that if I see children misbehaving, I'm going to call them out. And I'm also going to call out their parents. And I will call them out. And I will hold them accountable publicly if necessary, based on the fact that they're causing their children to become more ignorant by the second, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child. I've gotten so much crap by recommending to people, or telling people that, guess what? If you're parenting an SE child, like an extroverted sensor who is a child, and it's like, hey, take away the freedom away. Spanking will not work on them. Like, it is a waste of time to spank an extroverted sensor as a child. Like, it ain't going nowhere. Nothing's going to happen. But you take away their freedom, or you tell them, I'm going to lock you away in a room for a half hour, and I'm going to take all your toys away, and you will have nothing, and you will have to sit on a box. And I'm going to take all your choices away, and you'll have zero freedom. That is a total nightmare to them, and they will do what you ask, right? You always give them a choice, right? Or you take away their choices. Whereas an introverted sensor, you have to take away their creature comforts away. You have to make them uncomfortable. Spanking is an effective form of making them uncomfortable. That's why it is written, spare the rod, spoil the child. And this is why people are like, oh, there's so much better ways to spank children. You shouldn't be spanking children. I'm like, you're right. You shouldn't be spanking extroverted sensors. You should not be spanking extroverted sensors. And that whole line of thinking comes from how much failure is caused by spanking when it comes to extroverted sensors. So it ends up blowing up out of proportion where this is the standard towards all children. Well, none of those studies that back that data up are exploring whether or not the children in question are pragmatic and whether or not the children in question are extroverted sensing. Think about that. Those studies don't mean anything until you apply that research, those data, those statistics, those results to whether or not the child is pragmatic and whether or not the child is an extroverted sensor. All of that information is relevant. So no one has any right to tell me what is the best way of parenting. The point is, guys, it's like parenting really at the end of the day, it's like, oh, but Mr. C.S. Joseph, how can you tell people, how to parent people, and then you claim that no one can tell you how to parent either. Because love your neighbor as yourself is the standard with which I am following when it comes to parenting. And recognizing that it's not just my responsibility to just parent just my own children. It's my responsibility to potentially parent anyone. Children or otherwise, elderly or otherwise, it doesn't matter. We have to take responsibility, and we have to parent each other as a race. It's the only thing that's going to keep us sharp. Because if we're not sharp, without that conflict, without that rebuke, without that reproach, without that challenge, we are going to be collectively in this giant echo chamber. We are collectively going to be making decisions based on last known input. We're going to be making decisions based on unverified beliefs. That's the ignorance of extroverted thinking. This is a serious problem. So what are we going to do to fix it, right? Parenting is a huge problem. So let's go further. Let's go further with this. The mantle of responsibility, which is why I have it here. The mantle of responsibility is that we are nurturing our fellow race. Sure, it's not my responsibility to parent another man or another woman's children, but at the same time, it's my secondary responsibility. It's their primary responsibility because that's their children, but it's my secondary responsibility to recognize that I may have to step in a situation when their parent is not present. And if their parent is present, and they're causing ignorance, I'm not going to talk to the children. I'll go right up to the parent and be like, you're a terrible parent because of this. Get over it. You need to understand that you're causing a problem. And then I come to find out they're just as ignorant. And it's great. an additional person who's purporting the same problem over and over and over again and creating this endless cycle. That's not appropriate, right? Oh, but Mr. C.S. Joseph, you don't have a right to do that. And I'm like, having a right to do that doesn't mean anything. Because I have a right to speak, right? Freedom of speech, right? Because if I don't speak and everyone keeps silent, it's just what happened in World War II. They came for the Polish and no one said anything. And then they came for this group and no one said anything. And then they came for this group and no one said anything. And then the only group left was me. And then they came for me. And there wasn't anyone left to say anything about it. You see what I'm saying, guys? Silence also creates ignorance. Silence, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, not to speak is to speak. If you're not speaking, you are speaking. Inaction is itself a choice. Inaction leads to ignorance. We have to take full responsibility, this full mantle of responsibility when it comes to parenting each other and our race. My wife, she parents me all the time. She sent me text messages this morning parenting me. I'm very grateful that she parents me. I'm grateful that she doesn't put up with my bullshit all the time, right? She's a fantastic person to have in my life because she keeps me sharp. We need to sharp. That is why it is written, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man to another, okay? We need to be sharpening each other, and the only way we do that is through challenge, right? So, the mantle responsibility. Beyond that, beyond the mantle responsibility, parenting is to help provide two main core things for people throughout their life. And that is helping a person understand their identity, also known as how to get past the sins of the fathers, generational sins, etc. But understand, to answer the question, who am I? Every child has that question. They're always asking themselves that question, especially children that don't even know their parents. They're always asking, who am I, right? And then there is the even more profound question, which is attached to personal growth, which is, why am I? Who am I and why am I? These are the two most powerful questions that any child ultimately asks and any person ultimately asks within their life. Parenting exists specifically to help people answer these questions. It's no surprise, how children derive their identity from their fathers, not their mothers, right? It's funny, you talk about how, when a father going to court over his children and his children are being taken away from him because of a divorce, etc. And he's going into court over his children, and the judge or the lawyer asks him, well, do you know anything about? Do you know the names of his teachers? No. Do you know where he even goes to school? Do you know what their address is? Do you know what their phone number? And he's like, I don't know any of these things, right? But he does know where the child is failing in life. He does know where the child is successful in life. You know what I mean? It's completely different, but our court system is completely biased towards the feminine, what the feminine is aware of for the children, and completely unaware of the masculine aspect of where children are. All fathers love their sons. They really, actually do. This is also proven in the boy crisis when Warren Farrell talks about how many inmates who are in prisons who have sons, and the things that they say about their sons is so profound. And it just further proves that the masculine is there for children, but it is completely disrespected by society. How, it's all, children gain their identity from their fathers. And without their father's presence, they ask themselves the question, who am I? Who am I? And they don't know the answer to that question. And it ends up creating a cycle of problems. This is why oftentimes we have people who don't feel like they make good parents. They end up having abortions over and over and over again because they don't think that they make good parents, because they don't know who they are. They don't know their identity. This is also one of the reasons why children take on the names of their fathers, the surnames of their fathers, and why women, when they get married to men, take on the surname of the man, because they take on the identity of the father, right? And just as Dr. John Beebe explained recently in his presentation in Sacramento, Dr. John Beebe is like, okay, hey, when it comes to being a father, you take on the role that you're assigned. Sometimes you're assigned a role and it's against your will. And he shows a clip out of a movie with these two lesbian women and how this woman who's like a mother for these two children, she ends up taking on the masculine roles for a short period of time to be the father of the house to protect these children from this interloper, from this man played by Mark Ruffalo, who's getting in the way of their family and negatively influencing the children in a very unhealthy way, right? It's caused a huge problem. And as a result of that, she was able to take on those roles. Oftentimes people think that they shouldn't even be parents. The thing is that it doesn't matter what you think or believe. You can always rise to the occasion of being a parent. You always can. You just have to not be afraid. You have to stop worrying about your future or worrying about them not wanting you anymore or worrying about whether or not they're going to have a good experience or if you're performing well or worry about whether or not you're good enough or worried about whether or not you're caring enough. Who cares? You will rise to the occasion because everyone rises to the occasion because people have internal judgments that form about children or people who are misbehaving in public, which means you have the ability to elect yourself a parent at that moment and offer criticism, which means you are capable, psychologically speaking, of taking on that role at any moment, right? Look at it this way. The mantle of responsibility. Here's an example of mantle of responsibility helping a child come to know his identity and answer the question, who am I, right? And it comes from the old master-apprentice system. I remember growing up, and I had to deal with I had to deal with these commercials who were like, oh, hey, become a mentor, right? And I was like, what is becoming a mentor? I realized what that meant when I actually had my mentor. My mentor, Robert Bryant, an ESTP, good man, taught me everything I knew in information technology. He also gave me the type grid for the first time in my life. When I first got the type grid from him, I knew at that moment it was the most important thing that had ever happened to me. And I asked him if he would allow me to become his apprentice. And I apprenticed under him for about a year and a half. And I learned everything he knew. And I learned all about the psychology. He even and what caused that is because he criticized me in public and he publicly shamed me as a charlatan, as ESTPs do, as ESTPs should. He shamed me as this charlatan in front of these people in Bellevue, Washington, on the 22nd floor of the Copper Building, and he shamed me, right? And then he debunked everything that I was thinking, and he showed me that I was wrong. And then he gave me the type grid. The greatest gift that anyone's ever given me, quite frankly, is the type grid. He gave me the type grid, and I started learning the type grid under him. And of course, the type grid at that point was just interaction styles and temperaments. That's all it was. It wasn't anything more than that, And we've made it something far more since then. But the point is that I became his apprentice. See, I never had that experience with my father. I never did. My father was so concerned about his position and being in a pastor of a church and being so focused on church such that I could even accuse my father to his face and tell him, Dad, you cared more about the church than you cared about me, right? In as much as I believe that there's a good chance that my own son will say that, wow, Dad, you put your online community and your YouTube channel above me, right? So, sins of the fathers, right? Generational sin, right? I imagine that's something that I'm going to have to face down when my son comes of age. Hopefully he sees that I'm actually doing this for him and not just for myself. But I don't know if an INFJ can see it that way because their SE inferior is so sensitive. So I became the apprentice of this ESTP, who thinks he's an ISTP, by the way, still does to this day. It's really interesting. But I became his apprentice, and I was able to gain my identity, the who am I, through having a master. So that's the thing, if you don't have a father out there, go find a master. Train under a master, train under a mentor. You don't have to have your biological father to reach a higher level of wisdom. You have to have mentors, you have to have teachers above you, people that you trust, people who are very invested in your future and your success. These people exist, and people are often willing to take on this parental role to get you to that point. This is why when you talk about king, warrior, magician, lover, the four archetypes of the mature masculine, and queen, mother, matron, lover, the four archetypes of the mature feminine, as I explain in season 13 playlist on this YouTube channel. The point is that you can have an opportunity to become that parent to anyone. And it's known as the magician archetype and the matron archetype. These two archetypes exist to raise up people within your gender and confer upon them your wisdom and develop wisdom in your specialties where you become their master, right? So I guess it would technically be king, warrior, master, lover, technically speaking. Because you become the master and you are someone else's master and you are apprenticing them, you are teaching them, and then you're bringing them up and initiating them into higher levels of thinking, into maybe a trade of some kind. My ESTP mentor, my ESTP master, he taught me about women. He taught me about how women actually work. He taught me about how I was being a nice guy. He was starting to break down all the BS that I've ever learned from my entire life and from my own family when it comes to marriage, and expose the fact that my wife was not really good for me and that it was a serious problem. And I was this person who was unwilling to admit it to myself. And he exposed all of the lies by telling me unpleasant truths over and over and over. That's what it means to be a parent, folks. It's not just to teach your children, but it's also any human being you meet. You have to be willing to speak the unpleasant truths instead of the comforting lies. People tell themselves comforting lies all the time. This is one of the reasons why hellfire exists, to burn away the comforting lies so that people can be strong enough to accept the unpleasant truths. This is what parenting is about. This is what the mantle of responsibility is about. And this is why it's important to help people find their identity. Because people who don't know their identity, well, crime, constant man-children, extending one's youth into their adulthood long past its time. That's a serious issue. These problems are huge. Feminism is another example. And people are not honoring their mother and father. There is some huge advantages, though, for my parents being my parents, is because they, for the most part, didn't put up with my crap. And because of that, I was at a huge disadvantage at all times when it came to my family. But it made me stronger to deal with other families and deal with other people. Because I was basically rejected by my family, it prepared me to be rejected by the rest of society as a whole, which I am consistently rejected by on a daily basis. Especially as, for example, that conversation with the ESTJ telling me that he has every right to force me to be vaccinated for the sake of the safety of everybody else, because that's the affiliative right thing to do, right? He doesn't even understand how sick that is. So the first part of parenting is honestly identity, to answer the question of who am I, and everyone has this question. The second part is personal growth or causing other people to grow. Growth is painful. The only proof of life that exists is growth. So when you're parenting somebody else, you need to grow them. You are to grow them. And sometimes that means telling them unpleasant truths. Sometimes that means exposing them to pain of life and making them understand the pain of life and suffering so that they gain the wisdom that they need to be able to grow. Growth is everything. If there is no growth, there is no life. This is why immortality via technology is death. Technically, it's a form of undeath because there's no growth after that. You have to grow. You have to grow. And growth, as we've been talking about, growth is mostly signified by what we've been seeing in Season 19, talking about the path to enlightenment, the path to cognitive integration. It's our job as parents, primary parents for our own children, secondary parents for other people's children, and our own parents, if you think about it. How many times do you as children actually end up parenting your own parents and helping your parents out? They don't know everything. They are just people, just like you are, right? Sometimes we grow up thinking that adults have everything handled and everything figured out, and adults can do no bad. But the reality situation is that when we become adults, we realize that that's not remotely the truth. It's a bold-faced lie, right? So integration and enlightenment is super important. So remember, as a parent, it's your job to help your children or people in general to reach personal responsibility, to reach personal humility, to reach personal wisdom, to reach self-mastery, personal mastery. The 4 things that come out as a result of the 4 sides of the mind. And this is done through quarter-life crisis, midlife crisis, three-quarter-life crisis, and ultimately one's death, and preparing them for that entire life cycle. That is the ultimate purpose of parenting. That is the ultimate purpose of the magician/master archetype, the ultimate purpose of the matron archetype within the mature masculine, the mature feminine. We will not be mature without understanding that. We just won't, okay? So remember, it's all about this mantle of responsibility. It's all about identity. It's all about growth and growing other human beings and helping them on their path to enlightenment, their path to cognitive integration, helping them get through each of these life crises. Sometimes as children, you even have to help your own parents get through these life crises. Three-quarter life crisis is hard to get through if you don't have children underneath you to support you to get through that. Think about that for a second. This is why there's these yin and yang equilibrium of primary versus secondary parenting rules that every single parent, that every single person has. This is why we have parent functions. This is why one of the generations of the 4 generational archetypes represent as parent, the parent archetype, okay? We need to have a much higher respect for the responsibility and the pessimism and the skepticism provided by the parent function on a macro level and a micro level. And we have to recognize our responsibility from a primary parental role or a secondary parental role within our own families as well as everyone else's family. Because if we don't take on that responsibility, we are condemning our race to an endless cycle of ignorance, and that will lead to our doom. Final 2 verses of Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, goes like this: Behold, I will send my prophet Elijah to you in the last days. In the last days I will send my prophet Elijah, and he will turn the hearts of fathers to their sons, and the hearts of sons to their fathers. Or I will strike the land with a curse. Think about that, folks. This mantle responsibility is absolutely critical. Because if we do not take on this mantle responsibility for parenting our own children and parenting our fellow man, and taking responsibility for meeting our own needs, having personal standards, having personal boundaries, and then seeking our personal goals, and encouraging our fellow man and our children and their children to do the same, then we are condemning our entire race to its imminent destruction. We can't do that. This is why I harp so hard on the concept of fatherlessness. But fatherlessness can be easily defeated as long as everyone understands their natures. We're able to save marriages, or we're able to end horrible abusive relationships and start new healthy relationships, right? Where children aren't being abandoned anymore, and they have their fathers, and they're getting parented by their primary parents, and people around them are also parenting them. Similar to kind of like how tribes in the Amazon work. Have you guys ever figured that out? Because tribes in the Amazon, this is according to the book Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan and Cecilia Jethro. He says specifically about how, there is shared parental responsibility within these tribes. Folks, we need to have a shared parental responsibility. Secondary, not primary, because the primary responsibility is to the actual parent, but a secondary responsibility where we hold each other accountable, rebuke and reproach each other so that we can become sharp, so that we are able to shed our ignorance. We have to hold each other accountable in this way, just like the Greeks did. Like with Socrates and Plato. These philosophers held each other accountable to what they were saying and the claims that they were making. But instead, people just want to accumulate that for themselves, teachers that teach them what their itching ears want to hear. We live in an age of ignorance, folks, But if we don't stop that ignorance, we're going to lose our entire way of life. We're going to lose civilization as we know it. Mark my words, that is our future unless we change. We must repent now. Without repentance, without changing our way of doing things, without changing society in this area, without taking on this mantle of responsibility and making sure that we teach it to our children, all will be lost. Here's another biblical example. The book of Jonah. Jonah, this wimpy-ass prophet who was like, oh, you got to go to Nineveh. And he's like, oh, Nineveh's really evil. I don't want to go to Nineveh. I'm gross. And then he leaves and he goes the other direction. And then he ends up getting thrown off the boat because of this huge storm. He ends up in a fish for 3 days, and the fish pukes him out on the seashores outside of Nineveh. And he has to go, and he starts his journey to Nineveh. When he gets to Nineveh, he starts telling everyone, you need to repent because fire is going to fall from the sky and this whole place is going to get exploded because y'all are being dumb right now. And everyone's like, oh, wow, you're right. And you know what? That one generation, maybe they were the parent generation, right? Maybe they were the parent generation. Maybe they were the Gen Z of those days. They listened to him. And their entire culture changed. But the problem was they didn't teach their children. And because of that, Nineveh was ultimately destroyed anyway. So the story goes. I tell you the truth, folks, that is our future if we do not change right now, if we do not take up this mantle of responsibility, and we help our children and the children of others, as well as our own parents and every human being that we're around, understand what their identity is and understand how to reach that personal growth so that we can create a world that has shed its ignorance and is actually constantly seeking wisdom and personal improvement and personal sovereignty for the rest of the ages of the existence of our race. This has to happen, and it has to happen now. And that, folks, is the number one purpose behind the next 16 episodes of Season 23. How to parent each of the 16 types. And I will show you how to parent people, not just children, but also adults. It is absolutely critical that you go on this journey with me so that we can help lay down the foundation for a better world and absolutely destroy ignorance so that we can become keepers, collective keepers of wisdom and move our race forward to a better tomorrow. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening, please leave a comment. So, thanks for watching, folks, and I'll see you guys tonight.